Thank you very much to all of you for inviting me, and to Emma and Gabby for being my guide throughout the day. And I've loved the one-on-one meetings that I've had so far and the luncheon, and just love hearing your perspective. And I'm happy to get a chance to share with you today, and happy to continue the conversation after this presentation in whatever way. Okay, today, reaching out, I invite that, I welcome that, and I'm just so heartened knowing that all of you are going to be going out in the world with all that you've learned here at SAFS, and that you're going to be taking it on. Okay, and that cheers me to no end. Okay, so I'm going to tell you about Puget Sound Restoration Fund and sort of share that origin story. And then I also want to break it down into the parts of that that might be helpful to you in terms of our core principles. So in terms of carving out new restoration pathways and building the world you want to be part of, I personally want for there to be bull kelp forests in the world. And so those are bull kelp pressings in this initial slide. So I'm going to walk through Puget Sound Restoration Fund and sort of the pantheon of species that we've been restoring over the last quarter century. And then I want to talk about sort of the principles that guide this work, the spirit in which we collaboratively restore these resources with tribes and growers and scientists. And then I want especially to encourage you to go out there and carve your own restoration pathways, as we have done at Puget Sound Restoration Fund, because there is all kinds of room for new thinking in this world, especially with all the current tumult. So I wish you courage, and I'm happy to assist in whatever way I can. In terms of who PSRF is, first of all, we have somebody in the audience, Morgan Arrington, who used to work at PSRF, okay? And she may even be in this picture. This is an incredible team, okay? Right now there are 27 people, but we started out in 1997 with just one sort of at my kitchen counter. So it's just incredible to watch this team grow, to be working on the tide flats, underwater, at the hatchery. We're trying to restore abundance in every way we can. Pictured here are many of the species we work on, the pantheon of species, the foods that have supported people here for thousands of years. And we hope to be adding new species to this, you know, as we move into the future. But we've got an incredible amount of work going on all around Puget Sound. We're also spending a lot of time and effort on renewing our connections to resources, species, habitats that have supported humans. So it's not just doing work for ecological health, it's doing work for the health of human communities as well. It's both of those things, and they're the well springs out of which we sort of grow our different programs. We collaborate with so many different partners, and that is absolutely fundamental to all the work that we're doing. We have collaborated with SAFs pretty much since the beginning. Our hatchery is named after Ken Chu, who used to be a professor here and I think a dean. Joth Davis was our science advisor. We've worked with Carolyn Friedman, Stephen Roberts, professors here at SAFs. We have 4 different people on staff who have come out of staffs. I mean, just total powerhouses. So SAFs is one of the engines that is supporting the work of Puget Sound Restoration Fund as it is developed. So thank you to just building these brains in all the ways that you are. So chronologically, I'm going to walk through our different core programs as they fell into place, and to give you a little more information about it. So Olympia Oyster Restoration, this was really the first core program that emerged for PSRF beginning in 1999. We had founded in 1997. We were boosting projects in whatever way we could, but Olympia Oyster Restoration came along because Department of Fish and Wildlife had written an Olympia oyster stock rebuilding plan in 1998, and the state didn't fund it. And so therefore that created an opportunity for somebody to grab onto it and try to run with it down the field in whatever way we could. We are still working on Olympia oyster restoration, and I imagine that we will continue to do that for the next quarter century and beyond. These are long-term efforts. The case for Olympia oyster restoration is that historically there were 10,000 to 20,000 acres of core, dense Olympia oyster beds in Puget Sound, covering roughly 13% to 26% of tidelands. Not everywhere, but where conditions were just right. They're still there throughout their entire historic range along the West Coast, but they're mostly sparse, but we're really rebuilding densities. That's what we're up to. In terms of what we've done, I'm happy to be updating the numbers that Gabby read. We've actually restored close to 140 acres. To date, we've got a hatchery, and we've produced about 25 million oysters at our hatchery, which we're putting down in all the priority areas. We're working iteratively in many locations. Our largest project to date was a 20-acre project at the head of Liberty Bay, and we're waiting to get the results on that in terms of how that population is now rebuilding itself. Community shellfish farms, the next thing that dropped out of the water column for us, was sort of a chance to go into a place first up near the Canadian border in Drayton Harbor and try to figure out a new way to restore shellfish growing areas. Places that have been feeding people for thousands of years in this place. And there are many places in Puget Sound where we no longer have access to harvest as a result of pollution. So what can we do about that? And there are a lot of different complicating factors, and we sort of jumped in with both our feet to try to help figure that out and to try to come up with a community-based way of dealing with that. So in terms of why we do this, okay, we've lost roughly 13% of shellfish growing areas in terms of our access to harvest. There are roughly 257,000 acres total and 33,000 acre closed. So these are places that have been food sources for people for a long time, where we can no longer harvest shellfish, no longer dig, no longer be fed by these places. So really important to bring some of those online, and it is never-ending work. Once you restore a place, you've got to remain vigilant, because there are always new sources that can potentially harm that place. Washington has unbelievably productive waters. We're the #1 producer of farmed shellfish in the nation, and this truth was really sort of part of what goaded me into starting a new organization. So we'll get to that later. Shellfish, incredibly important culturally, economically, ecologically. So all kinds of reasons why we should be restoring these shellfish growing areas. In terms of what we've done, we've sort of created a new strategy for building community-based restoration in these areas, and we've restored over 1,000 acres in 2 locations, Drayton Harbor near the border and Henderson Inlet down near Olympia. So engaging people in a community shellfish farm enterprise, getting them to plant seed and experience some of the same things that a grower experiences when they're cultivating a crop of oysters. Giving people that experience is incredibly empowering, and it leads to great pollution control. It spurs engagement, and really delivers results. So it's not just a great thing to be out harvesting oysters. It is a powerful sort of restoration tool. Pinto abalone recovery was sort of the third core project that fell into place for Puget Sound, and it was really driven by Carolyn Friedman at SAFS when she came up from California. And she had been working on withering syndrome down in California, and she came up here, and boy, we really started to take a look at the abalone population up here, Pinto abalone, and really think about how they were doing. And so in 2003, we started by helping Carolyn put together a workshop in that year and the year after. And that really led to a long-term effort to rebuild breeding populations of Pinto abalone here. So Why are we doing this? Pinto abalone population declined by 97% from 1992 to 2017. So it was a really rapid, precipitous drop, and it was driven by overharvest and also poaching. And the state closed the sport fishery. There was never a commercial fishery, but the sport fishery in 1994, figuring that they could arrest that decline and that the population could then rebuild. And that didn't happen, and it didn't happen because we had lost breeding densities and breeding populations. Abalone are incredibly important to kelp forests. They're like one of the keepers of the forest in terms of grazing rocks and making sure that they're free for settlement. So super important ecologically and culturally. We've produced, as of this year, as of 2 weeks ago, a total of 75,000 pinto abalone at our hatchery over in Manchester at NOAA's research station, and they've been outplanted at 45 different sites. We started doing those restoration outplants in 2009, and we've continued them every year since then, and it's just building into this bigger collaborative effort with now tribes and the aquarium raising and outplanting with us. We've got a bigger team working on this, and it too is a long-term effort, okay? Saying yes to these things in whichever year we said yes, 1999, 2003, means really that you are in it for the long haul, and you need to be in it, and that's how you build good relationships. Shellfish gardening was another thing that fell into place starting in 2006, because again, we want people to experience what it's like to be getting food from these waters. We want to experience that now. We want to be able to experience that 100 years from now, just as people experienced it 1,000 years ago. Maintain a living system that feeds us. And that means that you need to provide opportunities for people to connect with those resources, those food resources. And Ray Hilborn has obviously done a lot in that particular area. But we want to give people in the places where they live that chance to do that thing. And it is profoundly comforting to know that the waters around us can still support and feed us. So we want to support that in whatever way we can. Bull kelp recovery. We started working on this in 2010 because the chairman of the Suquamish tribe, Leonard Forsman, mentioned, hey, you know, we've lost our kelp forest off Indianola, and you should try to figure out how to do that, because we had been partnering with the Suquamish tribe on Olympia oyster restoration ever since we started. And this was another thing that we could sort of, you know, put our brains to. It is not easy to enter into this space. It's not easy to figure out. We had halting, sporadic efforts in the beginning when we could sort of cobble together a little bit of funding to work on it, but we have been at it ever since 2010, and the effort is growing, the momentum is growing, not just at Puget Sound Restoration Fund, but across Washington. This is one of the things that Morgan was working on when she was working at PSRF. So we are trying to regrow kelp forests with tribes, working specifically with tribes. In terms of why we're doing this, there's been an 80% roughly loss of bull kelp forests, both in the Central Sound and in the South Sound. And this is this incredibly foundational, important habitat and food web builder in the marine system. So all kinds of reasons to rebuild it. It's unique living habitat. It supercharges our food web in all kinds of ways, and it sequesters carbon, these forests. So we want to work on this. The map specifically, if you can sort of zero in on the pink areas, that's where we still have bull kelp forests. But the blue areas, the teal areas, are places where they used to be, where they're no longer present. So in the place where I live on Bainbridge Island, there are no longer any kelp forests there, and there used to be a lot of them. So results, we are regrowing kelp forests with 4 different tribes. We started with the Suquamish tribe working off Indianola decagwatts. We're also working with the Squaxin Island tribe down off Squaxin Island, the Samish tribe in an area up in the San Juan Islands, and then just starting to work with the Port Gamble Sklallam tribe where Emily Bishop used to work to enhance a kelp forest there, sort of near Indian Island. So lots of really incredible work there in terms of developing a practice, a reliable, repeatable practice for regrowing kelp forests to restore a self-sustaining forest. There's a lot of capacity building that you need to do to make this possible. So to regrow kelp forests, to propagate seed, we needed to set up a kelp lab. And then really you need to build a seed bank. So you've got the genetic material from over 25 different kelp forests in Puget Sound, and you need to tend that seed bank. And then you need to understand how to take that germplasm out of its stored state and kickstart it into life again so that you can get that seed out there. It's just a lot of knowledge to build. And there's an incredible team at PSRF in collaboration with many others here and elsewhere to do this work. We also along the way, and I want you to know that I'm doing a little deeper dive into kelp forests here as one of our core species, in part because it's underwater and it requires a deeper dive, but also because it is just an example of what happens when you say yes to something. Yes, we'll try to figure out how to grow bull kelp forests. And then, you know what? It takes you to all kinds of places, all kinds of work, and you just have to keep at it. So in 2020, we helped co-author this plan, the Puget Sound Kelp Conservation and Recovery Plan, to really identify the major priorities that were needed to conserve and restore kelp forests. In 2021, we organized a kelp expedition, an 8-day expedition, where we were in partnership with tribes and 40 other entities. We were actually visiting kelp forests together. Jackie was along with us on the expedition because we were all learning together, visiting kelp forests in different parts of the Sound, in some places where kelp forests were thriving and persisting, and in other cases, either lost or struggling, really to get that full picture and to do sampling across that spatial gradient so we understand better what drives healthy kelp forests or struggling kelp forests. So just a thing that we wanted to throw in there to really build this big coalition. And then we got a grant from the Paul Allen Family Foundation to establish a network of 14 different kelp index stations around Puget Sound, where we could do paired ecological monitoring with divers and also instruments on buoys and down on the sea floor. So we're getting good environmental data so that we can correlate those two, exactly what kind of conditions are leading to healthy forests and what kind of conditions are leading to struggling forests. So this is very much a work in progress, and you can see the location of all those different kelp index sites. So we're getting more eyes on bull kelp. We're also trying to pioneer a kelp gardening technique, and we're starting on Bainbridge Island in places where kelp forests existed historically and where conditions are still good for kelp forests in terms of substrate, temperature, etc. And we're trying to figure out a really low-tech way to get more seed in the water so that when conditions are good, the seed is there and the forest can grow. And this too is complicated. You'd think that you could just throw seed in the water, and it is definitely not like vegetable gardening, I'll just say. And so, you know, we're going to keep at this in the years to come. Our newest thing was to work with the legislature this year to help designate bull kelp forests as the official state marine forest, to make sure that it is recognized there in the pantheon of symbols that define and characterize who we are, what we are in this state of Washington. Bull kelp very much deserves a place in that pantheon, and I'm really happy that there was almost unanimous support in the legislature for this. There was just one legislator who said no, we shouldn't, that we don't have time to deal with this, but everybody else said a big yes to bull kelp forests, and the governor signed it on April 26th, and there was just incredible tribal collaboration and support in this. Ocean acidification is another program area that we've been involved in since 2010, beginning with doing some monitoring in places where shellfish growers were experiencing spat failure and having difficulty setting oysters. And then I got involved in the Blue Ribbon Panel on ocean acidification in 2010, and that group identified 42 different recommendations for addressing different aspects of ocean acidification and the drivers. And Puget Sound Restoration Fund is busily working to implement about 6 of those. One of the things we did in partnership with UW, but applied physics lab, was to do a seaweed OA, a 5-year seaweed OA investigation north of the Hood Canal Bridge off Hood Head with some funding from the Paul Allen Family Foundation. So this is just an example of that. One of the recommendations of the Blue Ribbon Panel report, and also one of the recommendations of the Washington Shellfish Initiative in 2011, was to start a conservation hatchery. Hi, Meg, Chatsy. And so unbelievably, I was I was giving a panel presentation with some other people and said, you know what? Like, we're working on abalone restoration and Olympia oyster restoration and kelp, and we really need a hatchery where we can start propagating these species. And there were a couple people in the audience from NOAA who said, we can do that with you. And so that sort of just set the whole thing in motion. And so in 2013, we collaboratively established a hatchery that is named after Ken Chu from here at SAFS, an incredibly inspiring figure who has helped build aquaculture all around the world, and a very, very dear friend. And I'm happy to say that we are still going strong more than 10 years later and producing a whole variety of species. And Ken Chu would be incredibly tickled to know that it all continues. We're working on cockles as well with the Suquamish tribe and other tribes, and I think that this is an opportunity to talk about just sort of what restoration means for Puget Sound. We're working on a whole bunch of different native species, but we're defining restoration broadly. Okay, this is not just doing restoration for ecological places where those oysters or those abalone used to exist, but it's also cultural restoration. It is reconnecting to species that have cultural significance, and cockles is one of those species for the Suquamish tribe, for elders. We kept going back to the tribe, and we kept doing more and more things together, and we kept asking, well, what do you want to do next? And they were saying, and they all said, cockles. We need to be doing cockles. So we are figuring that out with them, and figuring out where and how we can get cockles in different places to make them available again for tribal elders, to restore that connection to a traditional resource. We're also working with Dungeness crab. And the way we entered that actually was because there was an incredible group called the Pacific Coast Research. Emily, help me here. What does it stand for? Yes, PCRG. And PCRG started this incredible monitoring of larval crab at 20 or so different sites around Washington, doing incredible work, but they needed a home. They needed some, they needed to sort of make a leap from kind of a research phase that's just sort of housed here and there with people trying to find grants here and there, to more of a place within an organization that could help power that. So we were very happy to integrate with PCRG, and just, bring Dungeness crab into the pantheon of species that we are paying attention to and trying to help in whatever way we can by supporting the researchers. Our newest program is a seaweed program. It also was one of the recommendations of the Blue Ribbon panel, and it's basically trying to figure out how to collect seaweed off shellfish farm, seaweed that is growing in excess and that is smothering the shellfish they're trying to grow, how to collect that and repurpose it so that it can be a beautiful, nutrient-rich resource on land-based farms. So reconvey, recycle that nutrient source from the marine system where it's causing problems up to land. So that's the newest endeavor, and these are some of the staff powerhouses working on that. And we're having a little bit of a moment here because a 5-year grant from USDA was just shut down, and Meg Chadsey here in the audience was one of the people working on that. And so we've got to do a pivot and find other funding sources to help us continue that work and all those great partnerships. So how are we doing for time? Good. Okay. So now I want what I want to do now is to sort of put myself back into the before 1997 times and what really prompted me to think that I should and could start an organization, basically to put myself where you are now, though you are infinitely more qualified than I was then, all of you. Put myself there, and because you too are going to go out in the world soon, and you're thinking about how to take your incredible skill sets and energy in order to do good in the world with all of your expertise. So there are so many different ways to do that. I will share what I've learned about my way and what galvanized me. And hopefully that will be helpful to you as you think about your paths. But I am heartened by everything you bring to the world, and I want you to feel like you too can carve out a new way of doing this work, okay? That's right for the moment, that resonates with people in the today times, okay? And that's going to require understanding the world and connecting with the world as you do now. For me, let's start with mid-90s, okay? I feel like in the mid-90s, there was a way of doing business in the marine restoration space, and that way of doing business was sort of setting nonprofit organizations, legislators, businesses at cross purposes, sort of locking horns, and 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 that was just simply the way of it. So nonprofit organizations then felt like they needed to really call businesses out for messing things up and really demand things from the legislator. We need more than you are providing us right now because we have big challenges. And that was absolutely true. In the 1990s, we're learning about, toxic legacy chemicals in sediments. There are tumors and lesions on fish. There are big pollution sources that needed to be taken care of. There's stormwater. There is a lot of stuff, big, hard stuff that needed to be taken on. And there was a very confrontational approach to taking those things on. So the stories that were in the newspaper at that time, to my ear, and there are others in this audience who were here and paying attention to this at the same time, to my ear, resoundingly negative, okay? For the most part, those stories. Very accusatory of a lot of different parties that, yes, they had a hand in creating the situation, but it was just, it contrasted in a very discordant way for me, because I was also hearing from tribes and shellfish growers about how incredibly productive their bays and inlets were, and just everything they got from connecting with those places, growing food in those places, gathering. So what I was hearing from them was so different than the general zeitgeist, what I was hearing in the news. And what was in the news then made people think, oh my God, I'd better not be harvesting shellfish anywhere, because people are telling me that Puget Sound is dangerous. And so it felt like, in the story that was being told, it felt like people were thinking, this is not a system that is feeding us. And it's not a system where I feel safe getting my food. And again, I knew from working with tribes and growers that there were a lot of places that met high water quality standards where people were growing shellfish and lots of other species. So those two things were at odds. And it also felt like, wow, if you want to really give people that connection, that experience, if we want to invest in waters that feed us, that are not just beautiful, okay? We've got to give people that connection, then we need to be telling a different story. I need to hear a different story. I want to be doing this work, and I'm not seeing anything on the menu of options that makes me want to jump in, okay? So that was part of what really drove me to create a different organization and a more welcoming, a more inclusive approach to restoration. So that's kind of where things were for me. And I was coming at this from the humanities. So the story was really paramount for me. What is the story that's being told about this place that has provided abundance for so long? And isn't that what we should be talking about? Holding on to that. And yes, a lot of problems to deal with, but let's keep our eyes focused on the big thing. So creating a big, positive, shared vision was definitely how I wanted to enter into that. And it was totally preposterous in the sense that I didn't have a whole lot to offer on the surface, in terms of I didn't have your qualifications. I didn't come in saying, wow, I know a lot about this. I know about growing oysters. I know about, propagating abalone. I didn't, okay? But there are a lot of people in Puget Sound, in our region, in Washington State, who do know about that. So if you can tell a big story, and it's a big story that people want to be part of, that you can co-create with tribes, co-create with growers, well, then you can start to build a head of steam. You can start to really snowball an effort that is collaborative in nature. So that's what I wanted to do, and I wanted it to be focused on abundance and connection, both of those things, real resources in real places with local communities. I also just really wanted to connect the marine story to the human story wherever I could. So this is a picture of the Kelp Highway, a coastal route by which people came across the Bering Land Bridge and peopled the Americas roughly 16,000 years ago. And they were able to hop, skip, and down our coast along the kelp forest that provided all the foods that they were familiar with. So if you're thinking of that feast that we want to maintain and sustain here, we had it when people came to the Americas. And you know what? We need to do everything we can to maintain that feast, those foods, those resources that feed us still. Because people are out digging. I was out off, Indian Island over the weekend, and there were probably 100 people digging clams there. I mean, this is a resource-based place we live in. I love that about it, and that's part of what we're keying in on, tapping into. So focus on first foods. So another aspect to sort of the 90s and thinking about creating a new organization is, well, where is there opportunity to create a new thing? Because there are a lot of organizations, a lot of wonderful agencies, a lot of great scientists working in this field, doing great work. So we add value? It did not make sense for us to take on salmon. There were a lot of different organizations involved in salmon, and there was a feeding frenzy for limited financial resources to support that. So there was no point in doing that. So it was like, well, let's look at those foundational species that have not been championed yet. Okay. So Olympia oysters, there was no restoration at that time. Pinto abalone, not on the radar for recovering populations. Bull kelp. So a lot of opportunity to key in on those foods, those species, habitats that have supported people as first foods here. So every single thing we do in our pantheon of species, it is both ecological superstar as well as first food. There's a strong human connection to those resources, and that helps tell the story. It helps get funding. It helps galvanize work and attract partners and build collaborations. This is just really a way of telling you to follow your instincts. For me then, like I was hearing about these opportunities, to do something with abalone, Olympia oysters, and kelp, even though they weren't broadly identified as priorities. They weren't in the Puget Sound Action Agenda. They weren't called out as high priority items. And so for me, it was like, wow, I get, as a human here, interested in the foods of this place, I get why doing that species would be really important. So just like, trust your own antennae in terms of how you build your own future restoration pathways. And begin by building great relationships. I mean, the people that I worked with back in the early 90s and late 80s, I'm still working with. The people here in this audience, I've been working with for a long, long time, and it will be a gift to me if I can continue working with all of you for many years to come. If you build good relationships, everything is made easier, everything. You can make a quick call and you can solve a problem just like that. If you have not done the work of building relationships and entering into this space collaboratively, giving your all, everything you can to it, and inviting anybody else who's willing to give their all, you are going to build a great relationship, okay, a great long-term recovery effort. If you go into the space and you're clobbering people over the head because they're not doing enough, I mean, just from a basic human nature point of view, that's just not effective. Okay, so build those relationships. And if you say yes to something, even though you don't know how you're going to do that and you don't even know what to do, if you say yes, you got to hang in there. Like, tribes are in it for the long term. You can't come in for 5 years and say, oh, I lost funding and I can't do this anymore. You got to make a commitment. And so that's been a beautiful part of this work too, and a hard part, right? It's hard to sustain efforts and sustain funding. And there are all kinds of new challenges to that. But, our species is adaptive, and we got to tap into that in all kinds of ways right now. From the beginning, PSRF has co-created all of our programs with tribes. We are operating in the home waters of 14 different tribes around Puget Sound. And they know so much about these forests, these oyster beds, these species that have fed their people. And they have so much to teach us about how to do this. And again, if you are creating a big shared vision, like they want to rebuild their first foods too, of course. And so you're just simply creating a space where people from their different perspectives can enter into it and provide all kinds of of horsepower. This has been an incredibly meaningful part of Puget Sound Restoration Fund. Collaborate with other knowledge holders. Of course, if we're going to set out to restore the native oyster, Olympia oyster, the one native oyster of the West Coast, of course, we're going to work with shellfish growers. They've been cultivating this particular oyster for generations. They understand what the habitat conditions are. They understand how to produce seed in a hatchery. They've got all this incredible expertise. Plus, this is their heritage too. This is the oyster on which the shellfish industry was established in Washington State. So there's just so much opportunity to partner and collaborate with growers. So they've been another just incredibly foundational part of building our efforts. Engage all kinds of tide landowners. Washington is just such an interesting place to do this work because of the way that our tidelands are owned, okay? Roughly 75% of tidelands in Puget Sound and Washington State are owned privately, okay? So that means that as a public agency, you're limited really in where you can work, and it's harder for a state agency to approach a tide landowner and pitch them on the idea of doing native oyster restoration on their tide land, because there's a suspicion about a regulatory agency, and is this going to tie their hands in any particular way? It's hard to do that. It's incredibly important to work with tribes on tide lands that they understand well. They know where the harvest sites used to be. We know where the oyster reserves are. Like, we need to be working with all of the different types of owners. And as a nonprofit, you have that flexibility, okay? You can approach a private tide landowner and have it be an incredibly positive experience, so they know, wow, I've got native oysters on this beach and we can grow them. There's an opportunity to increase that population. That is just 100% feel good. So I really can't think of a single tide landowner who has ever said no to this over the last 25 years, because why would they, right? And so there's a lot of power in coming at this from the nonprofit sector. Build community. I have this picture here specifically because this is a kelp knowledge symposium that Morgan helped organize with the Suquamish tribe last November. Build that bigger community that is so vital to figuring out how to conserve and restore kelp forests, and understand better about what's happening and what we can do about it. And it was just a big, beautiful, day-long effort to put our heads together and figure out how to do this collaboratively. So build that bigger community. You know, don't just, in supporting your effort, whatever your effort might be, whatever your restoration pathway might be, you know, be part of this bigger community building effort. Build resilience. I mean, the species that we're restoring, they're ecologically important, they're first foods, they're also resilience builders in the marine system. Like, if you can get a dense, self-sustaining oyster bed right there where a salmon stream is, so that all those out-migrating juvenile salmon have that good structured habitat where they can feed and sort of get used to that nearshore system, fatten up a bit before continuing on their coastal journey. Like, you're doing a lot there, right? In a foundational way. So it's been really wonderful to focus in on sort of the marine architecture, the oyster bed structure, the kelp forest structure that supports all kinds of other organisms, and really figure out how to build those in the right place where you can build resilient systems that are not just supporting oysters, not just supporting salmon, but supporting human communities that are there and our ability to harvest from those incredible waters. I think most of what I've learned over the last quarter century is really to just simply emulate the oysters, emulate the kelp forest. There's a lot that they teach us about how to be doing what we do. And I'll give you some examples. You know, as biogenic living structures, oyster beds and kelp forests, they are not just species unto themselves, but they're powering the food web. They're doing all kinds of things, you know, filtering the water, providing estuary support in lots of different ways. So they are building a system that is supportive of community, supportive of diversity. And so as you set out, and as I set out to build an organization, and as I was learning how to do that every step of the way, I began to understand that what I was doing was really trying to do what oyster beds do in the marine system, trying to do what kelp forests do in the sense of creating an organizing structure, okay, an organization with programs that we work on, an organizing structure that can help support this larger community, okay, and help us reconnect and connect to all of those different systems that support us. And so, like, they are showing the way, honestly, if we're just kind of paying attention to the things that they're teaching us. And in particular, with, just to use Olympia oysters as an example, there's a lot we've learned about where and how to rebuild a native oyster population in an embayment or an inlet so that it's really operating on all cylinders. But really, mostly what we're doing is facilitating what the oyster does. Like, we think we know, and we do know some things, but the oyster knows better how to be an oyster. So if you can get it into that system, into that bay, then the oyster can find its best spot. If you can just get that larval production going, kickstart that, then, and there are lots of examples for this, and I just don't think I have time to go into all those examples, so I'm going to move on. Anyway, learning from the species we're restoring is great. Chronicle the full big story, okay? When you're inviting a reporter in to talk about the work you're doing or why kelp forests are important, like, you know, don't be prescriptive. Invite them in, give them an experience, take them out in the field to an incredible beach. Let them discover what you've had the chance to discover. Let them tell a part of the story that you yourself would never have been able to tell on their particular platform. Let everybody into the story so that they can be part of it, right? Don't prescribe what you want them to write about it in order to meet your particular needs for that story. So that's one of the big things that I've learned. Make it fun. Launch expeditions, treasure hunts, get people out connecting, learning, discovering. That will help power a longer term effort. And it just makes the whole thing an adventure. And filling your work life with adventure is kind of part of what you hope to do, right? Building a life for yourself that helps the world and that also creates an incredibly interesting path forward for all of you. Just other examples of things you do. You know, this is fun. This is adventure filled. This is food filled, all right? Like, experience all of it. Go outside your comfort level. I certainly have, and I've really enjoyed that. Celebrate whenever, wherever you can, because it is incredible. We live in a place where the abundance of these resources have supported culture, cuisine, community for thousands of years, and where they still do that, and where there are so many opportunities to hold on to that, okay? It's incredible. Celebrate it. Give people a chance to celebrate it and be part of it. And this is my last slide, and really it is just simply to cheer you on as you go out and you too become world builders in the way that oyster beds are world builders, kelp forests are world builders, and the way in which we all need to be world builders in order to navigate the turbulence of this particular moment. I wanted to end with this slide because, you know, once you start on these pathways, it evolves, right? It takes you places you could never have imagined. I mean, the thing that I'm probably most involved in right now is weaving with bull kelp and just understanding what the bull kelp stipes can do and connecting with them and doing an exhibit up on San Juan Island with some other people to showcase bull kelp forests in woven form and artistic form. And like I am on the journey wherever it takes me. And I hope it continues for a long time. And I'm going to love hearing about what all of you do with the incredible knowledge that you are gaining here at SAFS. And thank you so much for inviting me. And it's been a pleasure. I'm happy to answer any questions. And have you been able to hear me? I haven't been placing the microphone. Bit late for that. Yes.
I don't want to preempt the students, but I want to congratulate you on presenting the marine environment, Puget Sound particularly, but the rest of the coast also, as a food producer instead of someplace we can dump the sewage that nobody will notice.
Yeah.
And I admit that most of the anti-pollution work, which I and others were involved with, was pretty punitive. Who can we sue? Who can we fine? Who's going to pay for the cleanup? And I'm thinking particularly of the Tacoma area and the PCBs. So I don't know that that has ever really been resolved. Are foods being produced in that area? Do we have to worry about the old PCBs, or are they covered up by new sediments?
Thank you for the question and also the reflections. Incredibly important work, all of that punitive work, right? But also just, opening up that story. Well, a lot of it did. Yeah. Yeah.
It's them, it's them, it's them, it's them, but they died. That company went out of business 200 years ago.
Yeah, for sure. But in Commencement Bay, to your question, there's actually, I think, going to be an opportunity to rebuild an Olympia oyster bed with Port of Tacoma in that area. And this would not be for harvest purposes, but really building resilience, building filtration, getting that living system ticking again. And amazingly, Olympia oysters, for all of their diminutive size, like, wow, they can live in some places and thrive in some places where you would not imagine and really build their densities. So like I'm hoping that Olympia oysters can take on some of those issues in Commencement Bay. Yeah. Any, Meg?
I've been asked before, how would you choose the name Puget Sound Restoration Fund? Because it does lead some people to think that
Yeah.
not money.
I know. That's been an interesting thing to think about. And let's just say that it must have been aspirational. Because I didn't have any money with which to start PSRF, and therefore, we began things in straitened circumstances. But I think that we are beginning to live up to that name and have started to live up to that name in recent years in the sense of really, for instance, getting lots of legislative support to support lots of different kelp partners. So not just the work that we're doing, but tapping into the legislature to support 10 other partners doing bull kelp work in Puget Sound. Getting private foundation funding to support not just Puget Sound Restoration Fund, but also Reef Check and lots of partners. So I think that we're getting there. And maybe it was just always going to be a long, slow build to getting there. Um, and we're still in the game and hopefully will be. So we can continue along that track. So creating a vessel in which we could help direct funds towards projects. That's really how it began, and that's how I began, going out and just simply raising money to support a community project here and there that was deemed a priority. So I'd go out and write the grant proposal and get that money. So practically, that's why I think it was called fund. But I think that I like the fact that it's taking on a different, evolving meaning.
See, grant has the same problem.
Right. And it is confusing, right? But again, also it creates a vision of building a big fund. So let's do that, right?
Any more questions? If not, we can carry on the conversation outside and over beer or other refreshment. So let's thank, once again, really interesting talk.
Thank you.